You can see those remarks in their entirety on our website. Go to cspan.org. Senator Boxer will be joining our colleagues in the Senate this morning to work on the budget. Lawmakers will take up 5 separate budget resolutions, including the House-passed version and President Obama's budget, with test votes on all those expected today right around 3:45 Eastern. And now live to the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. Chaplain Dr. Barry Black will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, sustainer of us all, give today to our senators reverence to realize your presence, humility to know their own needs, trust to ask you for help, and obedience to accept your guidance. Remind us all that all great things have their price. May we remember that there is no purity without vigilance, no friendship without loyalty, no joy without service, and no crown without a cross. Help us to be willing to pay the price that we may enter into our reward. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., May 16, 2012. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Kirsten E. Gillibrand, a senator from the state of New York, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Madam President.
Majority Leader.
I now move to proceed to calendar number 365S 2343.
Clerk will report the motion.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 365 S2343, a bill to amend the Higher Education Act of 1965 to extend the reduced interest rate for federal direct Stafford loans and for other purposes.
Madam President.
Majority Leader.
Following my remarks and those, if any, of the Republican leader, the Senate will begin debate on several motions to proceed to Republican budget resolutions. Consent was asked last night. I'm quite sure that the first hour be equally divided between the two leaders, with majority controlling the first half, Republicans the final half. That's already done, isn't it?
Senator's correct.
Yeah. There will be up to 6 hours debate on these motions to proceed to the budget resolutions. Senators should expect 5 roll call votes around 4 p.m. if all time is used, and it probably will be. S 3187 is due for a second reading, I'm told.
Clerk will report.
S 3187, a bill to amend the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and so forth, and for other purposes.
Madam President, I would object to any further proceedings with respect to this legislation at this time.
Objection is heard. The bill will be placed on the calendar.
Madam President, it's almost universally acknowledged that Republican obstructionism has reached new heights in the Senate. There are separate articles written about it. There are even now books written about it. Democrats would have to break a filibuster, I guess, to declare the sky blue or the earth is round. And passing even the most common sense and census legislation can take weeks or months. So with a mile-long list to do, we can't afford to waste any time. Yet today, Republicans will force the Senate to waste a day on a series of political show votes. We'll spend hours debating and voting on a handful of non-binding budget resolutions, even though we've already have a legally binding budget. If one of the Republicans' budget passed, which it won't, by law it's non-binding. We have a binding budget resolution. The Senate could spend the day passing tax cuts for small businesses that grow and hire people, or even legislation to keep the FDA running, Food and Drug Administration. We could be considering the Paycheck Fairness Act, ensuring American women receive equal pay for equal work. We could be debating cybersecurity legislation, which the Pentagon says is the #1 issue facing this country today is cyber insecurity. We could be working on a farm bill that Senator Stabenow and Roberts have done such an outstanding job excuse me, saving the country $23 billion, reducing that by that much. We should be on that bill. Or we could be protecting 7 million students from aid hikes on their federal loans. We can even move a series of appropriation bills to implement the budget we've already enacted. Instead, we'll debate and vote on a series of stunt budgets. Republicans aren't interested in getting anything done this year. They've said so from the very beginning. Their leader, my friend from Kentucky, has said #1 issue is to defeat President Obama. So they don't mind wasting a day of the Senate's time on useless political show votes. Republicans can say over and over they're only forcing votes on 4 Republican budgets today because Democrats failed to pass their own budget. That couldn't be further from the truth. In August, Congress passed and President Obama signed a budget that reduces the deficit by more than $2 trillion. It's called the Budget Control Act. 28 Republican senators, including my friend, the minority leader, voted for that last legally binding budget. But since August, those Republicans have developed a case of amnesia. Why else would they walk around Washington claiming we don't have a budget? And unlike the hollow Republican budget resolution the Senate will waste the day debating, the Budget Control Act actually has the force of law. If Republicans were serious about reducing the deficit, they wouldn't be working so hard to undo that August law, which cuts more than $2 trillion from the deficit. Democrats agreed that across-the-board cuts to domestic spending and defense programs agreed to in the Budget Control Act aren't the ideal way to solve our nation's fiscal problems. But the cuts were designed to be tough, so lawmakers were forced to reach a balanced deal. Unfortunately, Republicans refused to be reasonable. They refused to raise even a penny of new revenue or ask millionaires to contribute their fair share to help reduce our deficit. And Democrats won't agree to a one-sided solution that lets the super wealthy off the hook while forcing the middle class to bear all the hardship. Madam President, the American people agree with this. These 4 stunt budgets all take that one-sided approach which protects wealthy special interests at the expense of ordinary Americans. And they clearly illuminate Republicans' priorities to shower the wealthy with tax breaks paid for by the middle class. All 4 of the Republican plans cut investments that help middle-class families get back on their feet in order to increase tax breaks for businesses that ship jobs overseas. All 4 plans would double the student loan rate. It would put colleges out of reach for many students in order to protect tax loopholes for special interests. All 4 plans end Medicare as we know it, gutting seniors' health benefits to lavish more tax breaks on millionaires and billionaires. Yesterday, the Senate showed it's possible to advance policies that improve our economy and put Americans back to work, as long as Democrats and Republicans work together. In an overwhelming bipartisan vote yesterday, we passed the Export-Import Bank reauthorization that will support 300,000 jobs during the next year. And these jobs will help American companies sell their products overseas. But every moment we waste refighting old battles or revisiting Republicans' failed economic policies is a time that could be better spent creating jobs. The time for show votes is over. Now it's time for the Senate to get back to work putting Americans back to work.
Madam President.
Republican Leader?
Are we in a quorum call?
No.
You know, before I was Republican leader, I was probably best known as a lonely warrior against campaign finance reform on the grounds that it violates the First Amendment right to free speech. But before that, I was probably best known, at least in some quarters, for an ad that I ran in my first Senate campaign. It featured a pack of bloodhounds running around looking for my opponent who missed so many votes giving paid speeches around the country. We thought we should call him out on it. Well, I can't help but think back on that ad when it comes to Senate Democrats and the federal budget. Where in the world is it? Where is the budget? We've got a nearly $16 trillion debt. We're borrowing more than 40 cents of every dollar we spend. Entitlements are going broke. Millions are out of work. And Senate Democrats can't even put a plan on a piece of paper for a vote. Can't even put a plan on a piece of paper so we can have a vote. What are they doing over there? What are they doing? Isn't anybody over there embarrassed by the fact that they haven't offered a budget in 3 years? Haven't offered a budget in 3 years. It's been 3 years since the Democrat-led Senate felt it needed to put a budget together so the American people can see what their priorities are and what they plan to do to fix this mess. 3 years in which they've completely abdicated their responsibility as a majority party to show the American people what they stand for, to put their vision in black and white for all the world to see. The fact is they don't have one. Don't have a budget. As far as I can tell, their only plan is to take shots at our plans and hope nobody notices that they don't have one of their own. They're so unserious they won't even vote for a budget that was written by a president of their own party. It doesn't get more irresponsible than that. I think Treasury Secretary Geithner summed it up pretty well when he was asked a few months ago what the administration planned to do to address entitlements. The single biggest driver of the national debt. Here's what the Secretary of the Treasury had to say. He said, we're not coming before you today to say we have a definite solution to that long-term problem, he said. What we do know is we don't like yours. You have to give the guy points for candor. No plan of his, but he didn't like ours. What breathtaking disregard for the problems that we face. So if you're looking for a simple three-word description of the Democrat approach to the problems we face, it's this: duck and cover. Duck and cover. They don't have a budget of their own. They're going to vote against their own president's budget later today, in all likelihood, and they're going to vote against every budget Republicans put up. Now, the majority leader has tried to get around all this by suggesting that the Budget Control Act we negotiated last fall should count as a budget, since it sets the top-line amount we're going to spend. But he knows as well as I do that's not a budget. A budget is a list of priorities. It reflects your values as a party. It shows the tough choices you're willing to make. It's not just dollar figures, it's a vision. And it's the responsibility of any majority party to put one together, to stand up, Madam President, and to be counted. But since Democrats refuse to do their duty by the nation, Republicans will attempt to do it for them. Later today, we'll vote on 5 different budget proposals. The President's, Congressman Paul Ryan's, Senator Pat Toomey's, Senator Paul's, and Senator Mike Lee's. We'll give Democrats a choice and see if they have the courage to get behind any of these proposals or none of them, and we'll learn a lot in the process. By the end of the day, we'll know whether there's a budget that Washington Democrats support. And the American people will know without a doubt who's voting for solutions in this town and who isn't. They'll know who's got a plan to fix the mess we're in and who doesn't. They'll know who'd rather spend their time criticizing others than doing the hard work of setting priorities and making choices. Now, Senate Democrats don't want to explain how they'll fix the fiscal mess we're in. They don't want to say how they'll preserve and strengthen entitlements. What they really want to do is just complain about others. They're putting their desire for campaign material ahead of their responsibility to govern. The tragedy is, every year they do so, the problems we face only get worse. The debt gets bigger, entitlements get closer to insolvency, and the American people have to go another year wondering when things will ever change. Well, some people up here think it's time to do something now, and we'll know who those people are by their votes. Now, Madam President, I would now ask that the Chair execute the order with respect to the 5 motions to proceed to the budget resolutions provided for under the order.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to the en bloc consideration of the following concurrent resolutions, which the clerk will report.
Motions to proceed to calendar number 357, S-Con Res 41, calendar number 354, H-Con Res 112, calendar number 356, S-Con Res 37, calendar number 384, S-Con Res 42, and calendar number 395, S-Con Res 44.
Under the previous order, there will be 6 hours of debate equally divided between the 2 leaders of their designees, with the majority controlling the first 30 minutes and the Republicans controlling the second 30 minutes. Senator from North Dakota.
Madam President, this is a consequential discussion today, because it really is a question of the future economic policy of the United States. That's what we're talking about here today. I just heard the Republican leader say there is no budget. I don't know how to say this, but sometimes I wonder if colleagues pay attention to what they're voting on here. Last year in August, we didn't pass a budget resolution. Instead, we passed a budget law. Now, anybody that's had 10th grade civics knows a law is stronger than any resolution. A resolution is purely a congressional document. It never goes to the President for his signature. A law has to pass both bodies and be signed by the President. last year, instead of a budget resolution, we did a budget law called the Budget Control Act. The Budget Control Act set the budget for the next 2 years, for this year and next. More than that, it set 10 years of spending caps, saving $900 billion. Madam President, in addition, the Budget Control Act gave a special committee the authority to reform the tax system and the entitlement system of the country. And it said, if you come to an agreement, special committee, your action cannot be filibustered. You've got to go right to the floor for a vote. And if you don't agree, there'll be additional $1.2 trillion of spending cuts put in place. Now, Madam President, the special committee didn't agree. And so that additional $1.2 trillion of spending cuts is now the law, in addition to the $900 billion of spending cuts. That's a total spending cut package of more than $2 trillion. That is the biggest spending cut package in the history of the United States. And for our colleagues to say, well, there are no spending limits in place, really? What is the Budget Control Act then? It's a law passed overwhelmingly in the Senate, passed in the House, signed by the President of the United States. Now, Madam President, why are they engaged in this diversion? Well, I think I know why. Because the last time our colleagues on the other side were in control, when they had it all, the House, the Senate, the White House, from 2000 to 2001 to 2006, they had both houses of Congress. Until 2008, they had the White House. So, of course, nothing could be changed in terms of the policies they put in place until we had a new president. And what happened? What happened when they had total control? Their policies were in place. Madam President, Republican policies led the United States to the brink of financial collapse. That's what happened. And you know what they want to do now? They want to go back to those failed policies and do it all over again. Madam President, we can't let them do that. That would be a disaster for this country. It would be a disaster for the world's economy. Now, Madam President, I don't know what could be more clear than when their policies were in place, they brought this nation to the brink of financial collapse. I remember those days. I remember being called to a special meeting in this building with the leaders of the House and the Senate and the head of the Treasury Department under President Bush and the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who told us if they didn't take certain actions the next day, there would be a financial collapse in the United States within days. Madam President, I was in the room when the rescue for the major financial institutions in this country was designed, and we were told late on a Saturday night if we didn't reach agreement by the next day, the Asian markets would open Sunday night and they would collapse, and our markets would open the next Monday and they would collapse. Barack Obama was not the president. George W. Bush was the president. The Republican policies, economic policies, had been put in place in 2001, in 2002, and 2003, and those policies were still in place when we came close to financial collapse. We don't forget. And, Madam President, let's go back to what happened with the private sector jobs picture. At the end of the Bush administration, we were losing 800,000 jobs a month. Now we're gaining 130,000 in the last month. The months before that, immediately preceding, we were gaining about 200,000 jobs a month. We have had a gain, now that the economy has started to turn around under this president, of 4 million jobs created in the private sector. There it is. The red line is the results of the last time the Republicans controlled the policy here. Job losses every month. And finally, under this president, things have begun to turn around. Instead of losing jobs, we're gaining jobs. And the same is true on economic growth. An economic growth record is very clear. In the last quarter of the Bush administration, the economy was shrinking at a rate of almost 9%. You can see it there, that long red bar. The economy in the last quarter of the Bush administration shrinking at a rate of almost 9%. But that, too, has turned around under this new president, and we're now averaging economic growth of about 3%, a dramatic improvement. But our Republican friends aren't satisfied. They want to take us back. They want to take us back to those failed policies that had the economy shrinking at a rate of 9%, had us losing 800,000 jobs a month. Now, Madam President, we're not going to support that. We're going to oppose that. One thing the Republican leader got right is we're going to be voting against going back to those failed policies that put this economy in the ditch, that put us on the brink of financial collapse. He's absolutely right. We're going to oppose that. And our policies have begun to turn things in the right direction. Here are the positive signs for the U.S. economy. 26 consecutive months of private sector job growth. 11 consecutive quarters of real GDP growth. Unemployment rate down. Manufacturing has expanded for 33 consecutive months. Consumer confidence is showing signs of improvement. In fact, the last consumer confidence reading is at a 4-year high. U.S. auto manufacturers that were on the brink of bankruptcy under the Bush administration policies, the Republican policies, are now returning to profitability. And state revenues are showing signs of improvement. Madam President, one way we can reality test is how is our economy doing compared to our major competitors? How are we doing compared to the Europeans? How are we doing compared to Japan? How are we doing compared to the United Kingdom? On every one of those tests, the United States comes out on top. Our economy is performing better than the European zone, all the European countries combined. We are doing better than Japan. We are doing better than the United Kingdom, and this chart shows the story. Our economic growth is the best compared to our major competitors. Madam President, if there's any doubt that Republican policies had us on the brink of financial collapse, we can just look to the study that was done by Alan Blinder, the former deputy chairman of the Federal Reserve, and Mark Zandi, who advised the McCain campaign on economic policy. The two of them did an analysis of the federal actions taken to deal with the fiscal crisis and the financial crisis, and here's what they concluded. We find that its effects on real GDP, jobs, and inflation are huge and probably averted what could have been called Great Depression 2.0. So when our friends attack the president and say he didn't lead, really? He averted a depression. He averted a depression. He prevented a financial collapse, because that's exactly where we were headed when the Republicans were in control. Zandi and Blinder went on to say, when all is said and done, the financial and fiscal policies will have cost taxpayers a substantial sum, but not nearly as much as most had feared, and not nearly as much as if policymakers had not acted at all. If the comprehensive policy responses saved the economy from another depression, as we estimate, they were well worth their cost. Madam President, that's exactly right. But what do our colleagues on the other side want to do? They want to take us to extreme austerity. They want to slam on the brakes even while this economy is in a fragile recovery. Madam President, we don't have to wonder what would happen if we adopted the policies that they are presenting here on the floor of the Senate today. We don't have to imagine. We can just look across to Europe because they are pursuing the policies that our colleagues on the other side advocate here today. And what's happening? We've got a kind of an experiment going on. Because what our Republican friends are pushing for is being done in Europe. And what are they experiencing? Here is a column from the former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder. Austerity is strangling Europe. The direction of European economic and financial policy must change away from pure austerity toward growth. Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Italy, Spain have made substantial progress in stabilizing their finances. But the economic and political situation in these countries shows that austerity alone is not the way to resolve the crisis. Madam President, do we have a problem with debt? Absolutely. Do we need to deal with it? Absolutely. I was part of the Bowles-Simpson Commission. I was part of the Group of Six. I've spent hundreds of hours negotiating with colleagues on both sides to get a result. But the answer is not extreme austerity right now. Almost every economic analyst says if you do that, you'll slam this country right back into recession. And again, we don't have to look very far to find out if that's true, because Great Britain has tried that approach. And what have they experienced? Well, here's from the Wall Street Journal. On April 26th, UK slips back into recession. That is exactly the formula that is being presented by our colleagues on the other side of the aisle today. Let's slam on the brakes. We're going to put this thing right back in recession. Hey, they had their chance. They ran the economic policy of this country for 8 years under the Bush administration, and sure enough, they had this country on the brink of financial collapse. Now they want to return to those same failed policies. Madam President, what a mistake that would be. Now, you've heard the Republican leader say here, there's no budget. We have no budget. As I indicated in the beginning of my remarks, we do have a budget law. It was passed last year. It's called the Budget Control Act. We can put that slide up. Let me read from the Budget Control Act, because maybe my colleagues missed it when they were voting on it. Here's what it says in 2 places. The allocations, aggregates, and levels, referring to spending levels, set in the subsection, shall apply in the Senate in the same manner as for a concurrent resolution on the budget for fiscal year 2012. Is that confusing? It says in the same manner as for a concurrent resolution on the budget for fiscal year 2012. The identical language is repeated for 2013. The allocations, aggregates, and levels set in the subsection shall apply in the Senate in the same manner as for a concurrent resolution on the budget for fiscal year 2013. That's about as clear as it can be. And I might add, the Budget Control Act, as I indicated earlier, is stronger than any resolution, because a resolution is purely a congressional document. It never goes to the President for his signature. So the Budget Control Act that set the budget for 2012 and 2013 has the force of law, unlike a budget resolution that is not signed by the President. The Budget Control Act also set spending limits, not just for 2 years, but for 10 years. It capped spending for 10 years, saving $900 billion. It also provided the full enforcement mechanisms including a deeming resolution that allow budget points of order to be enforced for the appropriations bills that come in 2012 and 2013. And the Budget Control Act did something else. It created a super committee, a reconciliation-like procedure to address entitlement reform and tax reform, backed up by a $1.2 trillion so-called sequester. Sequester is just a fancy word for more spending cuts. The Budget Control Act, that is the law, said if the special committee didn't reform the tax system, didn't reform the entitlement system, that there would be another $1.2 trillion of spending cuts imposed on top of the $900 billion. Now, we all know the special committee didn't reach an agreement. And so that additional $1.2 trillion of spending cuts is in place. Madam President, that's a total of $2 trillion of spending cuts. That's the biggest spending cut package in the history of the United States. For our friends on the other side to say there are no spending limits in place here, it's just wrong. It's just wrong. Madam President, we do have a problem. We got a big problem. And this chart that talks about the spending and revenue of the country over the last 60 years tells us why we've got a problem. The red line shows the spending of the United States over that period. The green line shows the revenues. And you see a big gap between the spending and the revenue. That's why we have deficits. Our friends on the other side just like to refer to one part of the equation. They just like to talk about spending. But the reality is deficits are created by the gap between the revenue and the spending. And you can see in this chart that we are at or near a 60-year high on spending. We've come off a little bit now off the 60-year high. And we are at or near a 60-year low on revenue. So, Madam President, we got to work both sides of the equation. Again, we are at or near a 60-year high on spending. We are at or near a 60-year low on revenue. So what is to be done about it? The public says we ought to have a balanced plan. They say the best way to reduce the federal budget deficit is a combination of additional revenue and spending cuts. 62% say that's what we ought to do. 8% say just increase taxes. 17% say just cut programs. Madam President, I was part of the so-called Bowles-Simpson Commission. And that commission, there were 18 of us. 11 of the 18 supported the conclusions that called for that kind of approach. Additional revenue, but also additional spending cuts. And, Madam President, that's what the American people says we ought to do. But that's not what our friends on the other side are proposing here. They propose actually additional tax cuts. Dig the hole deeper before you start filling it in. And then they say, well, in addition to that, we will have really draconian spending cuts. Because you're going to have more tax cuts that primarily go to the wealthiest among us, and you're trying to reduce a deficit, that means you've got to have even more spending cuts. Just say that our Republican friends, the budgets they're going to be offering here today, they have something in common. Every one of them ends Medicare as we know it. Every Republican budget offered today ends Medicare as we know it. Madam President, on Social Security, one of the Republican budgets being offered here today cuts Social Security 39%. That's their answer. If you're going to have more tax cuts for the wealthiest among us, who already, many of them, aren't paying their fair share of taxes, if you're going to give them additional tax cuts, trillions of dollars in some cases in these budgets they're presenting today, then how are you going to make it up? Their answer is end Medicare as we know it. That's in every one of their budgets. One of them has gone so far as to say, well, let's cut Social Security benefits 39%. And, Madam President, we'll be voting on that later today, and we'll see who stands behind that proposal. Every Republican budget cuts taxes for millionaires by at least $150,000 a year. Are you listening? Every Republican budget being offered here today cuts taxes for millionaires by at least $150,000 a year on average. Madam President, every Republican budget being offered here today protects offshore tax havens. What are offshore tax havens? Let's go to that next slide that shows my favorite picture of a building down in the Cayman Islands. Ugly house. Little 5-story building down in the Cayman Islands. Lovely building. That building claims to be the home of 18,857 companies. They all say they're doing business out of that little building down in the Cayman Islands. 18,857 companies. Now, they're not doing business out of that building. They're doing monkey business out of that building. And the monkey business they're doing is to avoid the taxes that they owe in the United States. Madam President, every Republican budget protects those offshore tax havens. Now, Madam President, the House Republican budget plan, the first one that we will be voting on today, is totally unbalanced. No revenue. In fact, it's a lot more tax cuts. $1 trillion of additional tax cuts for the wealthiest in our country. But they do cut some things other than taxes. They cut health care, almost $3 trillion. They shift Medicare to a voucher system, ending Medicare as we know it. They block grant Medicaid, going right after the most vulnerable in our society, children, disabled, those that have the least. They cut the safety net for seniors, children, the disabled, increasing the number of uninsured by more than 30 million. And they have large cuts to education, energy, and infrastructure. Madam President, cutting education doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. You talk about eating your seed corn, that's it. After our House Republican colleagues put out their budget, the Catholic bishops said this. The Catholic bishops, as this headline says in the Washington Post, said the House Republican budget authored by Mr. Ryan fails the moral test. And, Madam President, certainly it does. Let's go to the next slide. This plan cuts discretionary spending $1 trillion beyond what the Budget Control Act did. And, Madam President, if you look at priorities, it kind of leaps out at you. Health care, cut by almost $3 trillion, from $12.7 trillion to $9.9 trillion. And when you go to the question of education, where the United States is already lagging, in fact, the United States ranks 25th out of 34 OECD countries in math. We're 25th in math. Let's go to the next. In science, we're 17th out of 34. So we're 25th out of 34 in math. We're 17th out of 34 in science. And our Republican colleagues, the budget from House Republicans, say cut education by 25%. Cut it from $77 billion to $58 billion. That is a 25% cut in education under the House Republican plan. Madam President, gasoline. We've all seen gasoline prices rising. Now, we're thankful that they've been easing back in recent days, but nonetheless, on May 14th, average $3.75 a gallon. And what is the Republican answer to rising gasoline prices? Well, let's cut those energy programs that are designed to reduce our dependence on foreign energy. Let's cut them 60%. That's what the House Republican plan does. It cuts programs to reduce our dependence on foreign energy from $4.7 billion a year to $2 billion. 60% cut in programs to reduce our dependence on foreign energy. And, Madam President, if anybody's driven on the highways of America, we all know we got work to do there. If we look at infrastructure spending in our country versus our major competitors, we can see China is spending 9% of their GDP on infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports, rail. Europe, 5%. The United States, 2.4%. Madam President, we got to do better than that. So what's the Republican answer? On transportation funding, they cut it 34%. They cut it 34%. Madam President, I think we understand the direction that our Republican colleagues want to take this country, and it's full speed in reverse. Back to the failed policies that put this country on the brink of financial collapse the last time they were in charge. Now, Madam President, we'll hear our colleagues on the Republican side say, you can't raise any revenue. You can't raise any revenue, even though revenue's at or near a 60-year low right now. If we look historically at what it's taken to balance the budget, the last 5 times we balanced the budget, revenue was at 19.5% to 20.6% of GDP. Under the Republican plan, it never gets above 18.7%. So I don't think they're very serious about balancing the budget. Former Senate Budget Committee Chairman Judd Gregg said this about the need for more revenue. We know revenues are going to have to go up if you're going to maintain a stable economy and a productive economy, because of the simple fact you're going to have this huge generation that has to be paid for. That's the baby boom generation. Former Senate Budget Committee Chairman DeMint, another Republican, also said we need more revenue. He said a complete deficit reduction plan, one that can gain support from Democrats and Republicans, will need to combine comprehensive spending cuts with structural entitlement reform and new revenues. Additional revenues will be needed if we're serious about controlling our debt. Madam President, one of the issues that has become more and more clear in recent months is that income disparity is widening in America. This shows since 1979 what's happened to the top 1% in terms of their income and what's happened to the middle quintile and the lowest quintile. Everybody else has been pretty much stagnant since 1979. The top 1% has gone up like a rocket. Now, Madam President, I got nothing to be critical about in terms of people doing well. We want everyone to succeed, but not just a part of the population. Now, Madam President, the hard reality is since 1992, or since 1995, the effective tax rate for the wealthiest 400 taxpayers in this country has been cut from about 30% to 18%. Madam President, that's not fair. The Republican plan is to give them more tax cuts. Give them more tax cuts. In fact, the House Republican plan on revenue provides an additional $1 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthiest among us, gives millionaires an average tax cut of more than $150,000 a year. It does not contribute one dime of revenue to deficit reduction. Madam President, I want to end where I began. The last time our colleagues on the other side were in charge, when they controlled everything here from 2001 to 2006 and the White House until 2008, their policies, Republican policies, led the United States to the brink of financial collapse. And now, the proposals they're making here today are to take us right back to those failed policies. Madam President, we shouldn't let them do that. That would be a mistake for our country. It would be a mistake for the world. I thank the Chair and yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from Alabama.
the fundamental question we as a nation have to ask is, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do for the future? What is our plan for the future? And the problem we have in this Senate is that the Democratic majority refuses steadfastly, adamantly, to produce and lay out their vision for the future while investing considerable amount of time and effort in attacking anybody who does. They even vote down their own president's budget, as bad as it is, the most irresponsible budget ever submitted here, in my opinion. So this is a really odd situation that we're in, and I would just say that our country has never been in more danger financially. Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson, Senator Conrad served on their committee, came before the Budget Committee, of which I'm the ranking member, and told us this nation, both of them, signed statement from them, this nation has never faced a more predictable financial crisis. In other words, the course we're on today is unsustainable. They told us that. They told us it could happen as soon as within 2 years, and that was over a year ago that they made that testimony. We are in the danger zone financially. And I know a lot of people would like to say it's not so, but it is so. Look at this chart. This chart shows the total debt of the Eurozone, including the UK, Britain, and the United States. Our debt exceeds that of the Eurozone. We have the larger debt than they do. And President Bush, who my good friend Senator Conrad, who's such a fine person, noted, presided over a period in which our debt increased, and it did increase. The largest debt President Bush ever had was $480 billion in 1 year, which was too large. President Obama's never had a budget that's less than $1,200 billion deficit. Never had a deficit year, and next year will be over $1,000 billion again, according to expert testimony. We are on an unsustainable path. So I would note that our $15.5 trillion for the United States is greater than the Eurozone, and the Eurozone has a larger population than we do. And let's look at this chart that just drives that number home again in case anybody is worried about it. I am. It shows the average debt per person, per capita, in the countries that we've been reading about that are in financial trouble, and it hits them sometimes surprisingly, and you never know quite how it's going to hit. But look at this. The debt in Spain, which is in a rocky financial condition, we know, is $18,000 per person. Portugal, 19. France, 33. Greece, 38. Greece's debt per person, $38,000, whereas the United States is $44,000. Yes, we have a little larger economy, but this is the danger zone. People were saying we could have a financial problem, a very few people, in 2007 as a result of the bubble in housing. They warned that that might happen. A lot of people, oh no, not this time, it's different. We got it under control, and we had a financial crisis that we haven't recovered from yet. So I would say, Madam President, we do need to take action. And we do not have a budget. We do not have a budget. If we had a budget, why did President Obama comply with the United States Code and submit a budget over here this year? If we have a budget, why did the House pass a budget? If we had a budget, why did 4 different Democratic congressmen and groups of congressmen submit budgets in the House? if we had a budget, why did Senator Conrad seek to have a budget markup in the committee? I mean, he basically said, well, we may not bring it up on the floor, but the law says we should have a budget. I'm going to bring one up in committee. And the day before the committee met, the Democrats met in conference and told him not to do it. So we were expecting to have an actual markup of a budget presented by the Democratic leadership, and we didn't get it. Why? Senator Reid said it would be foolish to have a budget. Foolish. What did he mean by that? Why would the Democratic leader, attacking Republicans this morning, why would he say it's foolish for us to produce a budget? Well, he said that because he meant it would be foolish politically. It would be not smart politically, because the Democratic leadership in the Senate would have to lay out a vision for the future, and the vision they wanted to sell or they could agree on was one that the American people wouldn't like. It wouldn't be smart. They would reject it. We would add the numbers up, see how much taxes they actually want to increase, how much debt they're going to increase, how much spending is going to increase. And those are the kind of things that are disappointing. And so that's not leadership. It's an utter failure of leadership. Whereas the Republican House, they produced a budget that changes the debt course of America, puts us on a sound financial path. You can agree with it or disagree with it. You'll have other budgets offered today from the Republican side that will have substantial support, that will change the debt course we're on, balance the budget in a certain number of years, put us on a sound financial path. And I expect every one of those budgets to be opposed by every member on the other side of the aisle. And it appears again that they will unanimously vote down President Obama's budget and not offer one of their own directly contrary to the law. And I know the majority leader this morning said, well, filibusters are a problem, but you can't filibuster a budget process. The Budget Control Act designed to ensure that a budget could be passed. The Budget Control Act does not allow a filibuster. Simply 50-51 votes is needed to pass a budget. So why isn't it being brought forth? Because they prefer to hide under the table, not stand up and be counted, not address the greatest trouble this nation has, which is our debt. And, Madam President, I see some of my colleagues here today, and we would like to participate in a colloquy, and I would ask unanimous consent to a colloquy that would last up to 20 minutes with my colleagues.
Without objection.
Madam President, I see Senator Blunt here, who was part of the leadership in the House before he came to the Senate. I know he has a deep understanding of these issues and the posture that we're in as a nation today. I also see Senator Thune, senator from South Dakota, who's a ranking and active member of the Budget Committee and part of the leadership here in the Senate. And I'd be pleased to, Senator Blunt, how do you feel this morning as we head forth in a day in which we'll bring up a series of budgets but have no plan from the majority party in the United States Senate?
Well, Senator, I'm embarrassed that we're not serious about this issue. As Senator Thune and I served in the House together while you were leading in these budget fights over in the Senate, and we had a budget every year. We didn't always every single year have a budget the House and Senate could agree on with each other, but the House always had a budget. The Senate always had a budget. We always complied with the law, the 1974 Budget Act, that says you have to have a budget. It says you have to have a budget by April the 15th. And frankly, you can't do your work without a budget. You can't get spending under control without a budget. You can't appropriate the way you should without a budget, because what the budget does is say, here's how much money we're willing to spend on defense, and here's how much money we're willing to spend on military construction, and here's how much money we're willing to spend on energy, that part of the budget. If you don't have that, you really don't have a starting place. And I have all the respect in the world for our friend from North Dakota, Mr. Conrad, but to be the budget chairman and have to come to the floor and all you can talk about is what's wrong with the other budgets that have been produced because your committee hasn't produced one, has to be frustrating for him. No matter how effective he sounded like he was in talking about what was wrong with the people that had a plan, it's easy to find out what's wrong with somebody's plan. But particularly when you haven't got any obligation apparently on your own part to come up with a plan. Remember, the White House was asked just a few weeks ago when Senator Reid said the Senate will not have a budget, what their position on that was, and they said, we don't have a position on that. Now, you know, the President submitted a budget. Why did the President submit a budget if he doesn't want the Congress to act on a budget? The House voted on his budget this year. It was 414-0. Not a single Democrat or Republican in the House voted for the President's budget. Last year, we voted on the President's budget, as I assume we will again today. Not a single Democrat or Republican voted on the President's budget last year, and the position of the White House is they don't care. It's an amazing situation to find ourselves in, and whoever is in charge of the Senate in the future needs to have a commitment to the American people that we're going to have a budget, we're going to have an appropriations process, and we're going to get this spending under control. We have maxed out the credit card. Everybody gets that. The figures you showed this morning of our debt relative to the countries that we sort of laugh at how irresponsible they are were numbers that I think we ought to look at pretty carefully. When our debt per person is greater than the Greek debt per person, I haven't seen a front page of a paper in a while that didn't have something about chaos in Greece on it because they've let their government get bigger than their economy can support. They've let their debt get bigger than the gross domestic product of their country by almost 2 times, but now we've exceeded our debt our debt exceeds our potential to produce goods and services in a year for the first time ever. And in fact, in the 3 years we haven't had a budget, the debt of the country has increased almost $5 trillion as we have spent over $10 trillion in those 3 years without a budget. It's unacceptable. Everybody here knows it's unacceptable. And every American family, frankly, that thinks about it knows it's unacceptable. And your fight, along with what I'm sure has to be Chairman Conrad's frustration to not have a budget, couldn't be a more important topic for us to be talking about today or for the American people to be asking the question, why not? Why are you just refusing to do your job? And I know nobody in